Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. This week, the Seattle City Council approved 2 new police contracts, the first since the end of the department's federal oversight earlier this year. KUOW's Amy Radil is here with a look at what's changed in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson declared a state of emergency yesterday as King County and other parts of Puget Sound remain under flood watch. Rivers around western Washington are overflowing their banks after 2 back-to-back atmospheric rivers dumped inches of rain over the last few days. Some rivers are expected to reach record levels. The National Weather Service predicts still more rain and flood potential as the weather system digs in for the next few days. They're also warning heavy rainfall will lead to an increased threat of landslides. New national protections could be coming for rideshare drivers and other app-based workers. Seattle Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is introducing a bill today. She says will put guardrails on digital platforms and prevent price gouging and discrimination. Jayapal is holding a press conference at 11 this morning alongside workers and advocates to announce the new legislation. And some University of Washington graduate programs are pausing admissions due to funding. The Seattle Times reports around 20 graduate programs won't take grad students for the 2026-2027 school year, including the astronomy department. Several programs won't take PhD students either, including linguistics, international studies, and human-centered design and engineering. Prospective graduate students typically submit their applications in December. In addition to federal funding cuts, UW is facing a 6.5% reduction in state funds, according to the paper. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. This week, we learned more about what the Seattle Police Department will look like under Katie Wilson. Seattle's newest elected mayor announced yesterday she'll be retaining Sean Barnes as police chief, and the Seattle City Council approved 2 new police contracts. The first was for the Seattle Police Management Association and passed unanimously. The second was for the Seattle Police Officers Guild and divided the council. A major issue was police accountability. KUOW's courts and politics reporter Amy Radil is here now to help unpack the new police contracts and their controversy. Good to see you, Amy. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's start by helping listeners understand how police contract bargaining works in the city of Seattle.
So the Seattle Police Officers Guild negotiates with city council members and the mayor's office. They are all directly involved, and they do talk about discipline and oversight and things like that, along with, the wages and benefits and what we think of as like the really traditional things that you get in a labor contract. It's all behind closed doors and confidential, and that can be really frustrating for us in the public, wanting to know where things stand. And then once it becomes public, the council only has the decision to pass it on an up or down vote. They can't make any changes to it. And, people were complaining that the process felt rushed. Councilmember Bob Kettle was one of the negotiators. 5 of the 9 members of the city council are part of the negotiating process. He was trying to push back against that, saying this does represent years of work behind the scenes.
We pushed and pushed to get an agreement. And here we are today. It took 2 long years. And I will be frank, it's been an incredibly frustrating process.
Okay, Amy, so that's how we got to the contract. What's in the new Seattle Police Officers Guild contract?
It covers 2024, so 1 year retroactive through 2027. It has salary increases each year. There's a 6% raise that's retroactive, and then it goes on from there. A big provision of it is expansion of the care team, which these are people who are not in the union. They are in a whole different branch of public safety, the unarmed social workers, crisis responders that we've been piloting, out on our streets as part of a new kind of unarmed alternative type of response response. But the Guild is signing off on how these teams that do some work that has overlap with police are actually going to expand. And then there's a lot of accountability provisions, and there have been kind of maybe 5 top priorities around accountability going into the negotiation. And I would say that they make some headway in maybe 3 out of those 5. So the negotiators for the city, gained some important provisions. Some of them they did not make progress on. How misconduct is investigated, how officers are disciplined, who does those investigations, whether they can be civilians versus sworn staff. And then, one of those provisions was tabled, and that was a problem for some members of the city council.
We're going to talk a little bit more about accountability in a minute, but before we do, Amy, let's talk more about the CARE team expansion. This was a pilot project, a new idea. What were some of the issues that were being hashed out in this contract?
The concern for the Police Officers Guild was they don't want these new workers, these new responders, to take over work that has previously been done by police. And so advocates were saying that, there's been some restrictions on it in the pilot phase. It's been in only one part of the city, and they always have had to have a police escort or a police handoff. And so the advocates for these type of responders said it was preventing the program from reaching as many people as it was geared to help. Were these workers kind of being sidelined by these restrictions? This contract changes that. It allows these responders to expand their teams citywide, I think almost around the clock, and they can go to certain calls without a police escort or a handoff. It might be seen as pretty narrow. These are behavioral health calls where someone's in crisis, someone's requesting resources, but this is an important new pathway, the idea that we are going to see these responders just heading straight to a call to interact with someone without that liaison with the police is a significant change.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, the council gets the thumbs up or thumbs down vote. What were they talking about?
So the vote to approve the contract was 6-3, and the people who voted against approving the contract, none of them were on the negotiating team. They were very focused on the accountability provisions, and they honed in on the one that isn't in this contract, which is subpoena power for our accountability partners, the Inspector General, the Office of Police Accountability. They have said, what if we are investigating a police officer and we need documents that they aren't providing, could be text messages, social media, anything else. And so they lack that subpoena power to get those records. And it's been a priority for the Community Police Commission and other partners for years, but it just hasn't moved forward. And Rob Sacco was one of the council members who voted against approving the contract, and he really highlighted this lack of progress with the subpoenas. And he said people shouldn't confuse other good changes like expanding the CARE teams with these other kinds of priorities.
CARE expansion, good. But make no mistake, CARE expansion and reform is not accountability.
Amy, is this different from the last Seattle police contract vote?
I think it's really different.
Yeah,
and
you were around for that.
Yeah, well, the last contract was just last year,
It seems like so long ago.
Well, this one didn't get as much attention, but basically this contract was passed by the council in 2024. It was completely retroactive, and it basically came out of this sense of the Seattle Police Guild was without a contract for years. We were seeing, escalating crime rates, a giant exodus of officers from the department. I mean, these were the main drivers, the main anxiety, I think, for city leaders with that contract. So they basically gave them a big pay increase, 23% pay raise. And that contract had very little in terms of these accountability gains. And it really, even at the time, I was surprised by it, but most people didn't see it as hugely controversial. It was like, we need to get officers a contract and try to keep them in Seattle if at all possible. And Rob Sacco voted for that contract last year. Nobody talked about the subpoena power except the direct players said, yeah, we are still seeking this. And people kind of didn't put a lot into that at that moment. It just wasn't seen as the top priority. So I think a year has made a big difference because crime is down, hiring at SPD has improved, and now we see the council and the public paying more attention again to police oversight. And I just think that's kind of this ebb and flow always in Seattle.
Really, really interesting. Well, as I mentioned, we want to talk a little bit more about police accountability. So let's take a step back and get into some of this context. Take us back to the 2018 contract.
all these things, that this list of things that we kind of talk about, the subpoenas and the other changes around investigating misconduct, they all kind of date back, in my mind, to Seattle passed a law in 2017 that had everything that the accountability advocates were seeking. But they were very dismayed because then the next year, the police contract blocked a lot of those accountability provisions. And the city council passed it. I mean, you have to keep in mind, like, people don't really necessarily blame the police guild for negotiating things that they think best protect their members. They're looking at the city leaders saying, why are you guys passing this contract when the community members are opposed to it? So these things like subpoena power, we've had them on our books, but they haven't actually taken effect. And then the bigger conversation is whether accountability should be on the bargaining table. In some other parts of the country, it's not, but here, so far, it has been. And then in the meantime, with each contract that the city negotiators are basically chipping away, getting those provisions from the 2017 law, they're actually reaching agreements with SPOG to implement those provisions. And this contract does make progress on that, but it doesn't have everything in it.
All right. Well, SPD has also recently exited federal oversight. How is the end of the consent decree playing into all this? Is it even on the table?
The end of the consent decree is on the minds of some of the people who opposed approving this contract. And they, noted in their comments to the city council, they were concerned about, not having the changes to accountability stay in effect that they need.
There were actually two contracts before the council, Amy. The second one was the Seattle Police Management Association contract, which also passed, in this case unanimously. Who do they represent, and what's notable about that contract?
Yeah, this is a little bit lower visibility union in the police department. It represents the captains and lieutenants, and their contract has implemented this 2017 accountability law. But their rules are different from the rank and file officers, and they probably aren't as concerned about being investigated for a use of force incident. So it's not necessarily equivalent, but the fact that their union has accepted these accountability changes, like the subpoena power and things like that, has been a powerful example to the public. And the council yesterday did vote unanimously to approve that contract, which I also think points out that whether it's the opponents on the council or the members of the public, they aren't saying dismantle the police, don't do anything for police. They're saying when the accountability provisions are in there and they're right, we do support these contracts. And so they did support a contract with those provisions in it. It sailed through, no problem.
All right. Well, this contract, Amy, was negotiated under the Harrell administration. Is there anything about it that feels particularly Bruce Harrell?
He's definitely touted, the care expansion, this new kind of alternative response that really kind of took shape under his administration. I assume that that's something that he wants to be remembered about his time in office. And then beyond that, I think he was someone who has been very focused on police hiring, and the city anticipates, they mentioned that the contract will probably represent 100 net new officers in the next year. So I would take that as part of Harrell's impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, there is a new mayor coming into town. Katie Wilson is moving in the first of the year. What has she said about this contract?
I think that she will have a focus on accountability as mayor, but she's also an advocate for organized labor, including the police union. My colleague spoke to Katie Wilson before the contract vote, and here's what she said.
I mean, I guess I'll just say, keeping it simple, that obviously we're going to be working within the confines of those contracts. And, I think, it's good. Our officers deserve the stability of a contract. Within those bounds, we're going to be doing everything we can to make sure that our police department is working closely in partnership with community and making sure that we have a really strong public safety system moving forward.
Katie Wilson's going to have to form some kind of relationship with Mike Solon, the head of the Police Officers Guild. What are they saying about this contract passing?
They put out, I guess, an announcement after the council voted to approve it. They posted a photo of Mike Solon in a superhero costume against a Seattle backdrop. They called the council's approval of the contract a victory for moderates and for public safety. And I think there was a sense that they had a strong incentive to reach a contract under the Harrell administration because the Wilson administration, might have very different priorities.
Sure. I know we're a ways out from the next contract negotiations, but what are you going to be watching for?
People in this contract have really clarified that this subpoena power is something that's very important to them. So whether there would be a breakthrough on those kinds of powers for the oversight bodies in the next contract. This contract does make some other changes that I think we'll want to see how well they play out. It allows for civilians to help investigate the most serious complaints of officer misconduct, like a fireable offense. And they were previously barred from those investigations, even though they have been involved in oversight for a while. The whole civilianization thing, there are some other changes for civilians to do certain jobs within the police department now. Lots of smaller changes, but we'll just want to see how they're adding up in terms of the overall performance at the department.
All right, Amy Radil, KUOW Courts and Politics reporter. Thanks for catching us up. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now, and thanks to our generous donors for your support. Help us out by clicking the link in the show notes, following and rating the show on your favorite podcast app. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.